Chapter 6. March to Khoy. The mighty Euphrates River has long been linked to the origins of human civilization. Over the centuries, the river has witnessed much as it courses through Mesopotamia, the longest and most historically significant watercourses of Western Asia. In late spring, the river swells and floods as melted snow from the Taurus Mountains makes its way downstream. Crossing it at this time would be considered unwise. In late April, it is exactly what Alp Arsalan is trying to do, and exactly what Romanus did not expect of him. Alp Arsalan had lifted the siege at Aleppo, coming to an understanding with Amir Mahmud, both who understood the possible catastrophic ramifications of a successful Byzantine campaign deep into Muslim territory. It was a rare coming to terms of political rivals, but one that was refreshing and necessary for the Sunni Islamic world. Alp Arsalan then headed east with his forces. He had to make his way back to Khorasan as quickly as possible. The Byzantines had a head start. Alp Arsalan had to move quickly in his preparations to confront Romanus. There was little choice. This army had to make the perilous expedition across the flooding Euphrates and then make its way through the narrow, rugged mountain tracks dripping with melted snow to get back to base. The army moved closer to the designated crossing point. The crisp smell of the fresh spring air was quickly drowned by the sound and then the sight of the roaring Euphrates. In the name of Allah, they began the crossing. It was a harrowing ordeal for the Muslims, watching many of their comrades and their animals being consumed by the fierce waters, snatching its victims beyond the outstretched hands of those trying desperately to rescue them. By the grace of Allah, the river was kind enough to let the majority of them pass safely, but the casualties were numerous, troop morale being amongst them. At this point, Alp Arsalan reassessed his troops, the bulk of which was in no state to continue. The campaign prior to the Byzantine incursion had been long and taxing for the average soldier, and the toll of the river crossing was too much for most. Alp Arsalan decided to release all of his armies, but kept only the most battle-hardened and loyal warriors. These were known as the Ghulam, Alp Arsalan's elite Mamluk troops. Lightening his troops also meant that they could travel quicker. Alp Arsalan was heading for Khoy, a city in the Azerbaijan region that had large flat plains for their horses to graze. It was a traditional mustering ground. The passage would not be easy. Along the way, Alp Arsalan's men had to traverse rocky track and many more rivers. In the rush to get to Khoy, many more men were lost. The few thousand Ghulams with Alp Arsalan were far from sufficient. Along the way, however, they came across mountainous Kurdish tribes whose warrior-like characteristics were impressive. The Muslim army needed fresh recruits, and these men would do just fine. In early summer of 1071, the army reached Khoy. It was a favorable military position. From here, they would be close to the Armenian mountains, where Alp Arsalan's spies are suggesting Romanus would head. The Muslims, however, needed more in their ranks. Fresh recruitment was critical. The faithful Nizam al-Mulk was deployed to gather as many recruits as possible from the neighboring cities of Tabriz, Hamadan, Isfahan, and if he had to, Baghdad itself. At Tabriz, Nizam was presented with a puny man. This poor man, despite his intentions, had failed to pass the series of strenuous tests required to join Alp Arsalan's army. Although Alp Arsalan was desperate for more soldiers, they did not need liabilities. Nevertheless, the puny man pleaded to be enlisted. Nizam looked at him and then commented rather sarcastically, "What can be expected of him? Will he then bring us the Roman emperor as a captive?" Despite such remarks, the puny Ghulam was accepted into the ranks. Meanwhile, in Khoy, Alp-Arslan was sending out messages to the neighboring tribes, especially the Turkic ones. He declared that he would be fighting as a Ghazi, solely for the sake of Islam and the Muslims, and not for the Seljuk cause. This upcoming battle would require all rivalries to be put aside for the greater good of the Ummah. The response was positive. Tribal leaders put their egos aside, just as mercenaries put their greed aside to answer the call. The Muslim world was well aware of what risk the Byzantines posed to them. In Baghdad, the caliphs also acted, ordering all mosques to make supplication, especially for Alp-Arslan and his men. Cause his troops to be helped by your angels, and his decision to be crowned with good fortune and a happy outcome. The numbers rose steadily. Meanwhile, in Theodosiopolis, Romanus was making his final preparations before marching towards Manzikert. His intelligence reports indicated that Alp-Arslan fled to Baghdad after being routed in Aleppo. In his ignorance, his confidence grew ever more so.